All right, this one should be a challenge. Gentleman sent me this 63 AC30 replica with added on top boost like the 63s had. And he built this himself. He got the chassis from a guy in the UK and searched out all the appropriate tag boards and built the whole thing. And as far as I can tell, given the information that he had, he did as good a job as anyone on the planet would have. The one thing that he might have done that others would not do with more experience, it's one of the reasons it came to his attention, is he has the generic SM labeled silver micas in the amp. Now, typically they don't make an amp sound bad until they fail. It's not like they're always bad, but they go bad. That's possible. We'll find out whether that's affecting this amp. But he said the amp has always sounded good, but never great. And he's heard various boxes on my channel, both the JMIs that I've restored and the modern ones that I turned into the JMI Plus spec that he thought sounded better than his amp. So he sent it to me to see if I could take this good amp and make it a great amp. And I said, I don't know, but I'll be glad to try. You'll get to see everything he did. His workmanship is top notch, is better built than any JMI I've ever encountered. It's F&T filter caps. He's got Sprague cathode bypass caps. He's got one radial here in the top boost circuit of unknown type. I'll check that. He's got Mallory 150Ms, aside from the two mustards in the phase inverter output there that you can see in the foreground. This is a couple years ago when the 150Ms were all white instead of yellow. Same cap, exactly the same. And all his resistors are Zycon 1-watt carbon films, which should sound absolutely wonderful. So let's power this on, and I've got the new set of good tubes from the JMI, the 65 JMI that's about to go out. Popped them in here for a minute because I knew that they were good. Before I powered on, this amp has got a mercury output and a mercury choke and a Haber power transformer. Let's power it on and see where we're at. All right, there's the hum. Now that hum is normal at startup with a cathode biased amp, but as the output tubes begin to draw the same amount of current, that should decrease. Okay, it's dropped down a bit. It'll continue to drop down over the next minute or two, but it is already at a non-worrisome level. So let's check the vibe trim channel with the effect off. It has no bleed. All right, that channel has less gain than most. I'll be checking all the resistor values. This is not to say that he made any mistakes. I don't know that he made any mistakes whatsoever. He was exceedingly careful, as you'll see in the workmanship later. But it's always possible to put a 47K where it should be a 470K, et cetera, just because color bands are similar. Many people make that mistake. I am fortunate enough to be red-green colorblind, so I ignore color bands on resistors, and when in doubt, I measure them. So I have still made mistakes like that just from being a dunderhead, as we all occasionally are. Let's go to the normal channel. By the way, this is a Strat, and you're hearing this through a Celestion Alnico Blue 15-watt speaker with a 57 on it, no compression or EQ. All right. Well, that channel, the normal channels, that's the dog's bollocks. That sounds just about perfect. That hum you get there is the normal amount of hum with the channel on 10, but there's no grounding issues. I'm not hearing any ground noise. That hum is partially like that because it's got that stock 47 nanofarad coupling cap that passes so much low end. But that channel is just about perfect. Let's go to the add-on top boost channel. Now that can be tricky because you can have microphonics, you can have signals interfering with each other because you have those longer leads. Let's see what it sounds like. It's got some bleed. All right, this one's wired like the TBX rather than like the original. So clockwise is more bass, clockwise is more treble, which is what I actually prefer compared to the vintage. The vintage is reversed and it gives you a much narrower sweet spot. So I think he made a good choice on that. The amp is not as bright as many AC30s. I'm wondering if that's what he's reacting to. Especially on the JMIs, they tend to be very bright, and because they have a lot of solid wire in there, which can vibrate and become ever so slightly, solid core wire can become ever so slightly microphonic between the slight microphonics of the circuit itself, of just the physical nature of the way that JMIs were built, and the tendency to be pretty bright. It adds a kind of air on top of everything. Here they got the treble dimed and the tone cut dimed. And that should be taking our heads off, and it's just not. So I need to look at that. Honestly, it sounds what a lot of modern guys would say is better, because it doesn't have that tendency to be microphonic, doesn't have that tendency to be bright. It's not going to any oscillation. There's no excessive white noise. There's some heater hum on both these channels. He has the heaters referenced to ground. I'll move that to the cathode for a little bit of added heater noise improvement, and I'll see about the lead dress on the heaters to the preamp. Right now, aside from a little bit of the heater hum, the only thing I'm hearing is that the amp overall doesn't have that air, that physical sense that the amp itself is vibrating, which can be part of the magic. And there's a little bit of bleed here on the top boost brilliant channel. It may just be the way these wires are going to each other. This is a shielded wire, but I'm still hearing it quite a bit when I touch it with my fingers. So I think that could probably be improved. And I'll triple check the quality of this little radial cap, which is a bit floaty in its current configuration. Before I put this on the bench and we can take a look at everything he did, which is, as far as I can tell, aside from those silver mica caps, going to be a long laundry list of how to do things right. This guy did a great job. I will say that these vintage correct little teacup knobs on the rear treble bass card are horrible from a player's perspective because there's no indicator line. All you have is the set screw on the other side. So may look vintage correct, but you can't tell what position each knob is at. I mean, it's fine to turn it and listen to it. But it's nice to be able to look at it or feel it from the other side. So if this were my amp, I would, pending the opening in the rear panel, which I don't have, if there was space, I would go with the chicken heads, or if not the chicken heads, some other smallish, 3/4 inch diameter or slightly less knob with a indicator of some sort that you can feel if you're reaching over the amp. And for fun, let's jumper the two channels. I think he had a question about whether it should be out of phase like the original JMIs or in phase like the modern ones. And my preference is always the out of phase because this is not a Fender. So let's get our basic sound with the top boost channel. There's so many variations available there that I cannot show them all. I will say that with the channels like this, there's a good bit. Where's that coming from? A good bit more hum. Is that coming from my cable? I may need to redo my instrument cable. Sometimes through use, I think, you step on it too many times. It's not very tight in his input jacks. I'm wondering if that's just the jack doesn't have a lot of tension on it. Sorry. I think I probably just need to clean those jacks. When I had both channels up, there was a hum that wasn't present with just the one. And that noise should not be happening when I plug and unplug into the normal input jack. All those things could just be dirty contacts. With the AC30, these jacks face up, so any dust settles in them. Even if you have a clean house. So if you're not using a channel very often, it can be a good thing to go buy the little plastic caps that fit in these 1/4-inch jacks to keep dust out. I will clean those. I'm not too concerned about that. I think once I change the heater reference to the cathode voltage, about 10 volts on the output, rather than to ground, we'll look and see where the heater hum levels are. But this amp sounds really damn good. I think if you have to nitpick, and I think he sent it to me for nitpicking, the lack of a higher end response, the lack of that air and that sense that you're hearing something, what's the best way to put it? We call it vintage, or we call it swirl. It is possible to build an amp too perfectly, and you lose some of the things that we associate with great sounding amps. And it can be extended high end, it can be just on the verge of microphonics, and it can also be, if everything is perfect in the amp, you can get a bit clinical sounding. And I'm sure right now there's 50 different threads on the gear page about clinical sounding amps versus swirl, vintage, blah, blah, blah. Too much is made in either direction of that. But in cases like this, it can be a simple thing to say, all right here, this is too perfect. We may need to take out these 1%, in this case they're 5% tolerance, I believe, resistors, and put in something with a wider discrepancy. So instead of exactly 100K and 100K, maybe we play around with 95K and 110K. That's a for instance. That's not something I'm definitely necessarily going to do on this. But there are a lot of things that go into making these amps sound good, and this guy nailed making this amp sound good. And then there is just this host of little bitty stuff that makes an amp sound great. And that's where we're not quite there yet, and I'm going to see if I can get it there. From good to great, that is the challenge. As you can see, the build quality is very high quality. That's a terrible sentence. The build quality doesn't suck. It's got the Haber power transformer, which is ever so slightly standing off the edge of this chassis. The chassis is not to entirely correct JMI dimensions, but it's close enough for our purposes. That won't affect anything. And it's got the Mercury Haddon output transformer, the 30H, VXO30H, and the choke, F&T filter caps. Right now I've got Tube Store Preferred Series tubes in it that I ordered for that 65. When amps arrive, I usually have them shipped without tubes. In a fixed bias amp, I'll ask for the output tubes to be shipped separately so I can verify bias and stuff. But most amps arrive without preamp tubes, and cathode bias amps without tubes at all. And I put in my test set. And my test set is fine. It's JJ's and mixed bag of preamp tubes. But for this, I wanted to know that everything was great. So I put in these brand new great tubes. Unlike, say, a Fender where the tube clamp is, there's no physical mark left on the base from putting in other amps. So the 65 shouldn't mind having its tubes borrowed for a day. Let's look on the inside. All right, here at the output end of things, everything is done fairly insanely neatly. F&T cap for the Vibe trim channel. This is the filter node for that. And it is, what's the word I'm looking for here? Can't use my words. Clamped very securely here with this nylon clamp. Rather than the large 12 watt 22K, he's using this 3 watt which is fine. It's still overkill. You could use a half watt for that. Vox didn't use a 10, 12 watt because of the wattage. They used it because it would span the distance from here to here. I guess you can't see where my here's are. Vox only used that large value resistor here to span that physical distance. A half watt would be fine. He's got a 68 ohm here. I've not verified what the actual bias is, but I imagine 68 ohms is going to be pretty much ideal. It's got a 25 volt, 250 microfarad cap there, which should be fine. The voltage usually ends up around 10, 11 volts here, so 25 volts is fine. In my own builds, I use a 63 volt just to have a little bit more insurance, but no problem with that. He used some 2 watt 1K screen grid resistors, metal films, and some 1 watt metal film 3K grid stoppers. Everything's done very neatly, very securely. He has the 100 ohm heater balance resistors here, which are half watts, going to a little tag board at ground, a little ground lug for right here. I'm actually going to move these from this ground to the output cathode, which is on this wire here, which is at 10 volts-ish DC positive, which is a better reference for that. That might reduce the heater hum that we're hearing on the normal and top boost channels. More on that in just a moment. Let me set up the camera to show you the rest of it. All right. Very, very neat wiring here to the input jacks. They're all cliffs. They're wired well. More of the 1 watt carbon films. The tag board is done neatly. I'll show that in more detail. You'll notice he used a 2 meg pot here as opposed to the 3-position switch in the originals. No problem with that. Much more variety. I usually use a 3 meg pot on that. Reverse audio, please. He's got a very heavy duty selector switch here, usually used for output impedance selectors, rated for much more current than is present in the Vibe trim switch, but this works. It's certainly safe. He says there's a pop when you change it. That pop is normal, but I can put a little resistor across it and that'll take away that pop. Let me show some closer stuff. All right, right here and here, all these you can see that unlike the Vox, which just has the wire come through the terminal and then go up at a right angle and then is soldered, he has each of these wires crimped back over the lug on the tag board. So each one of these has a very strong mechanical connection before soldering. So a little bit of overkill, and it would make future service a little bit tougher, but not impossible. No actual JMI was ever built this well. It takes forever, and the guy did it on every single connection. No problems there whatsoever. Let me do the magic of focus. You can see all good quality alpha pots throughout, and you can see all his connections. He's got insulation and heat shrink on them. Even places where Vox kept bare wire, he's got insulation and heat shrink. You can also see here all these picofarad value caps. In this case, in the Vibe trim channel, are these silver micas that just say SM. And as I've mentioned in other videos, those generic silver micas that just say SM as opposed to saying CDE, which is Cornell Dublier. These can develop leakage, and it's very common. So those are going to get changed as preventative medicine. Here at the phase inverter end of things and power end of things, in terms of the power switch, he has the hot going to the fuse and then to the power switch. All that is done very well. The ground of the AC cable is longer than the hot and neutral. It's actually going to chassis over here, but it's going where nothing else is going to chassis. So good job. It's on the other side of the bolt holding the cable clamp, which is not 100% code. In theory, the AC safety ground hardware should not be used for any dual purpose, but I don't think that this is going to cause any issues, as tight as that is. And he's not selling this amp commercially. This is for him. The only new old stock parts in the amp are these two Phillips Mustard 0.15s. And I said, I just spoke to the owner between these sections of videos, and I said that I will measure them very carefully. And if they are good, they can stay. If they are not good, please let me use 0.1s going forward in a repair, because you will not hear any difference between a 0.1 and a 0.5. I mean, it's like the difference between a high pass at 3 hertz versus 2 hertz. This is part of 1959. The design aspect in the UK was coming out of the hi-fi world for full frequency everything, and minimal screen grids and stuff. And these very large coupling caps in the output are really a relic of that. You won't hear any difference between a 0.1 and a 0.15, because that's well below the range of human hearing, let alone well below what frequencies quad of EL84s will pass, what the output transformer will pass, and certainly what any guitar speaker is capable of reproducing. So if these have any issues at all, and being older than I am, they might, you won't hear any difference between these and a 0.1 Mallory, unless these have an issue, in which case you'll hear an improvement. We've got this silver mica here, and let me move the camera angle. All right, the owner told me that of these two caps here, which are the two input coupling caps on the phase inverter, the one on the right is microphonic when he taps on it. And that connection has the 220K resistor coming from the wiper of the treble pot on the brilliant channel, as well as the wiper of the volume on the normal channel. That's where the two mix resistors go. And that is a high impedance node, and it is susceptible to becoming an antenna, and susceptible to noise in general. And I do see a mistake there. And that could be, no, I don't. Never mind. That is not a mistake. I thought I just saw the one resistor here as if the other 220K was joining before this resistor. The other 220K is on this red wire, which snakes along the back and then goes here. And this wire, this 220K is from the treble wiper. And this junction that I thought was two wires joining is just a NASA ground going back. Let me show it. You can't see where I'm pointing. Going to here. So it's always fun figuring out what someone did. And if he's got noise here, and he says this cap is microphonic, well, that might be worth changing out. The world is full of 47 nanofarad Mallories, and if one is bad, maybe the next one won't be. Given that he's got like 30 Mallories in this, if he got one bad one, statistically, that's not that unlikely. Just the way the world works. So let's look at the top boost circuit area. Got the 33 microfarad filter cap for the top boost add-on, which is vintage correct. Side note, JMI did not choose that value of 30 to 33 microfarad because it's crucial to the design. You can use a 10 microfarad or 22 microfarad there. You're not going to hear any difference. They chose it because they already stocked the 33 or 30, whatever it is, that they used for the Vibe trim channel. And they already had the little clamps that held it to the chassis, and they had space to install it on the 64 and later amps over by the Dual 8 over there for the preamp. Doo-ba-doo. That's where the later cap was added. Anyway, on this amp, this red and black connection, the red is the B plus connection, the black is the ground. This is the grid connection, which is shielded going to the volume pot for the brilliant channel. It's a bit sensitive to noise for a shielded cable, but it's possible that my hand being here is causing noise in something else in here. It's not just touching the cable. I'm not too worried about that because you won't be playing the amp while holding the cable. What is of a bit of concern to me is this heater wire here. The yellow and blue heater wire has a bit of excess, and heater wires in proximity to other things can be bad news. So I need to take this card out and really look at where everything is and find the quietest routing for that heater wire. It doesn't have terrible heater hum, but there is some. On that note, both channels, when blended, have more hum than either channel by themselves, which is another indicator that this cap on the phase inverter input that I just mentioned might have an issue. High impedance nodes can be very susceptible to such things. Of note, and possibly the cause of the lower gain in the Vibrato channel, the Vibe Trim channel. See this one yellow mallory here in a sea of white ones? Well, he said that he built this amp and he was copying an amp. I'm not sure where he got his material, and it had a 0.047 there. And he put in a 0.047. And then he got this famous book, A Service Engineer's Guide to the Vox AC30 Valve Amplifier, which is a fantastic book. But this book contains one mistake, at least, and I believe the mistake is JMI's, not Mr. Grosvenor. While this cap here, which is a bypass cap across a resistor in the Vibe Trim output, shows on all the schematics as a 0.005, and he's got a 0.0047 in here, so 4.7 nanofarad. The actual amps that I've had in from JMI, every single one of them, and every JMI amp, AC36, whose photo I've looked at, actually has a 0.05 there, a 0.047, which is what he had originally. And increasing the value of that cap does increase the output of the Vibe Trim channel. So I will be changing that back to a 0.047, and we'll see if the Vibe Trim channel gets back the gain it should have. The 65 I have here right now has an original Phillips Mustard 0.05, and a Mallory 0.047 will be functionally indistinguishable. So I have that change, and all the silver micas that just say SM are going to get changed for some higher quality Vichy ceramics. I'm going to look at the heater dress on this. I'm going to take this card out and look at it and see what I can't see from this angle. Make sure everything's good there. Now, one of the things that will take me some time, and the owner's already okayed this, is on this tag board, every single resistor I need to measure to make sure there's not a 47K where it should be a 470K, et cetera, or that he didn't say this, but for instance, say this is supposed to be 100K, this is supposed to be 22K, make sure it's not 22K and 100K. It can happen, and before I go to any heroic things and say, we must do this to introduce this vintage blah, 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 I'll make sure that I know exactly what I'm dealing with here. And it's the same thing I do on any actual JMI that comes in. If the JMI has been worked on, I have to make sure that whoever did the work put in the correct components. And if it's a JMI that has not been worked on, I may have to go through and measure every resistor to make sure that all the 100Ks really still are, because it's not uncommon in say a 65 amp for me to find a 100K that measures 60K or measures 300K or 1 meg or even open. So that's part of the troubleshooting, getting an amp from good to great. is where you just got to roll your sleeves up and do the grunt work before you can do anything brilliant. And so much of what is so much of what I get compliments for and get called nice things for um, is really just ticky-tacky attention to detail. It's not so much any alleged brilliance on my part. I'm not exactly putting Elon Musk out of work here. I don't think I'm doing anything that's genius. I think in some of my design stuff, I think I am rather clever at times. But a lot of the stuff that makes an app great is really just ticky-tacky attention to detail. Little boxes made of ticky-tacky. And they all look just the same. So let me dive into this and see what I see and report back.